René Descartes is the first truly modern philosopher. He represents a decisive break, or at least an attempted decisive break, from medieval scholastic philosophy, the sort of philosophy represented by Thomas Aquinas. Descartes was a Frenchman, and he was not just a philosopher. In fact, he was actually, if anything, more of a mathematician and a scientist. He was responsible for numerous innovations, such as the Cartesian coordinate system and efforts to visually represent algebraic equations. He lived from 1596 to 1650, and one of his seminal contributions was his effort to try to establish his thinking on a firm foundation that didn't rely upon some of the assumptions that Aristotelian philosophy made. In science, Descartes was a proponent of methods of observation, experimentation, and description that were novel, that broke new ground. He rejected this idea dating back to Aristotle of form of things, such as Aristotle's hylomorphism, where Aristotle conceived of some sort of connection between body and soul as instantiating a form in matter. And Descartes, at the same time, though, even as he rejected this, nevertheless retains the notion of dualism. So we'll talk about this a little bit later, but he was a firm proponent of the idea that the mind and the body are separate things, and that a human being is a composite made up of two things, mind and body, and that mind and body are radically different in their nature and in their orientation. Descartes in philosophy is primarily known for his method. He is the father of modern epistemology, and epistemology is just the study of knowledge. Where does my knowledge come from? What can I know? How can I be sure of what I know? And so forth are the kinds of questions that are typically discussed in epistemology. Descartes is known as a father of modern epistemology because he started a project of methodical doubt, where he doubted what he knew in order to try to find something that could be certain that he would not doubt. Descartes is famous also as being one of the first modern rationalists. There was a lengthy dispute between two different traditions of epistemology in the early modern and modern periods in philosophy. Those were continental rationalism and then Anglo-American empiricism. Empiricists say that all the ideas in our minds come from our senses, and rationalists say that there are ideas, a certain number of them at least in our minds, that in fact are presensorial, that are innate, so to speak. In the meditations which we read in this class, Descartes enters into kind of a folksy multi-day project. The meditations is written as a kind of a week-long excursion into the mind and its operations. And it's sort of a midlife crisis. Descartes is in meditation 1 aware that he has had many opinions which he has been taught, or opinions which he has acquired from his senses, which have turned out to be false. He resolves now in midlife, he has time, he resolves to investigate his opinions and to try to find opinions that are certain. The opinions which are false are numerous, so numerous that he decides that he is going to reject any source of his opinions that has given him a false opinion at all, unless and until he can prove it to be reliable again in a foundational sort of way. So he rejects his sensory experiences as trustworthy because his sensory experiences have proved before to be false. So this is obvious if you just imagine the many times that your senses deceive you. If you're driving along a highway and you see off in the distance a lake coming up, you get closer, it turns out it's a mirage, the sun has deceived you. Or you see someone walking towards you, she looks like she's very tall. You get closer to her, she's actually very short. Perhaps her slender figure deceived you, made you think that she was tall, and so on and so forth. Descartes also rejects knowledge of simple and general truths of reasoning that don't depend on sensory experience, because he thinks that it is possible for our faculties in engaging in these methods of reasoning to be mistaken. And Descartes famously in Meditation 1 tries to capture his universal doubt by supposing that an evil genius is employing his energies to deceive him. Descartes is famous in the tradition perhaps much more for his method than for his solutions to his philosophical problems. His procedure of methodical doubts was very influential. In particular, it's been very influential in shaping the sciences. Many of the discoveries in the Enlightenment era and since that time in science have been made by persons who have realized that the world in its fundamentals and its joints is not in fact as it appears to us. So appearances can be deceiving, and they have drilled down in their efforts as scientists to try to figure out what the world is in fact like. Descartes is famous then for the method of doubt and also for his efforts to engage in a type of foundationalist construction project. In Meditation 2, Descartes continues his folksy investigation into the nature of his mind and his opinions, and he realizes that even as he has doubted all of these opinions, bracketing their truth, assuming them not to be correct, there is an opinion that he cannot doubt, and that is his own existence. He cannot doubt that he exists. And the reason why he cannot doubt that he exists is because he is thinking. He is a thinking thing. And to doubt is to think, and to think is to be. So in Latin, one might say, I think, therefore I am, or cogito ergo sum. This is a famous phrase capturing this idea. And for Descartes, as long as he continues to think, he is a real being, a being with real existence. So his own existence serves then as a kind of a foundation, a fact, a truth, a reality that he cannot deny, something that is indisputable, an idea that is clear and distinct and incapable of refutation. Descartes is going to proceed in the balance of the meditations to try to reconstruct the rest of his opinions, all the knowledge and opinions that he has at this point artificially bracketed and assumed to be false. And he's going to use the cogito, the I think therefore I am statement, as a basis for this reconstruction project. Descartes, often his cogito is expressed as an argument, and Descartes denies this. He says it is a logically self-evident truth that he directly intuits. And this enables him to avoid the accusation of begging the question. So he thinks that he is incapable of doubting his own existence as a thinking thing, and that this is not an argument, it is in fact actually an indisputable reality. Descartes goes on to argue that his mind is really distinct from his body. And the reason why it is its own thing, it is distinct from the body, is because of his clear and distinct perceptions of it. So the premises might be expressed as follows. It is possible that all my knowledge of what I take to be the external world, including that of my body, is mistaken. It is not possible, however, that I could be wrong about my own nature as a thinking thing. Therefore, my own mind is known to be much more clearly and distinctly than my body. To put it more succinctly, I can be certain my mind exists, but I cannot be certain that my body exists. Therefore, the mind and the body are not the same thing. And so Descartes says that the mind is a particular aspect of him that is not reducible to body. It is a real separate kind of an aspect of him. In the third meditation, Descartes goes on to prove the existence of God. It's very important to him to prove the existence of God, not just because he is a committed Catholic, but also because God plays an important role in Descartes' efforts to retrieve the deliverances of his senses and the rest of the opinions that he has artificially bracketed and assumed to be false. Descartes actually offers two different proofs for God's existence, one in Meditation 3 and one in Meditation 5. He concludes that he cannot be God because he makes mistakes, and he argues that God is a perfect being. God would be a perfect being. In fact, in Meditation 3, he says that his conception of God's perfection can only be explained by the reality of God as its cause. There must be as much perfection in the cause of his conception as there is in the conception. So he concludes that God exists as a perfect and benevolent being. Okay, and on this basis, he argues, since God is perfect, God would not be a deceiver, because deception is an imperfection. So God is a truth teller. So when God offers him or serves as a foundation for a substrate for Descartes' opinions, then God is telling him the truth. God is not lying to him. So God serves as a kind of a guarantor of the faculties that he has. Descartes has been accused here of reasoning circularly. So he has to use his faculties and his ability to perceive clear and distinct ideas in order to prove God's existence. And God as a perfect being then guarantees the trustworthiness of these faculties. And this is an accusation of circularity that Descartes has been plagued with from very early on, first observed by a critic, Antoine Arnauld, and then later on by other critics who have articulated it in even more sophisticated ways. Descartes himself believed that he was not reasoning in a circle, and this objection was raised in his lifetime, and he did respond in a way that attempted to refute it. In Meditation 4, Descartes argues that God is not the source of his mistakes or his errors. He thinks that God, being perfect, is not a deceiver, so God does not bring about the mistakes that he has made with his senses over the years. If God is not a deceiver, then how does Descartes make mistakes? Where does the mistake arise? Descartes thinks that the mistaken judgments that he makes arise in the fact that he is capable of making decisions without assembling full knowledge. So God has given him faculties. These faculties are perfect in their kind, and he kind of artificially divides the mind up into two of these faculties, the intellect and the will, or a knowing faculty and a choosing faculty. And the intellect is capable of assembling knowledge, but the will is also capable of making decisions, and the will can make decisions even in the absence of the intellect's assembling full knowledge. So the intellect can assemble knowledge, and the will can then make a decision before the intellect has finished assembling full knowledge. And it is in making decisions without full knowledge that the will goes awry. So the source of error then for Descartes is because our intellect is limited. It's temporally limited. It is limited in its scope. We can't know everything. But our will is unconstrained. The will is capable of choosing in a kind of a way that is inherently maximal. Descartes resolves in Meditation 4 to remedy his mistakes and his errors by waiting until he has as much information as he can so that his intellect's assembly of knowledge is adequate. As mentioned in Meditation 5, Descartes offers another proof for God's existence. And in Meditation 6, Descartes again explores the relationship between mind and body. Descartes is a dualist. Dualists believe that we are two things, minds and bodies. They can be contrasted with monists, who believe that we are one thing. Some monists are physicalists and believe that we are just physical things. No non-physical aspects to us for them. And then other monists are idealists who believe that we are in fact just mental things essentially, and the physical aspect of us is not necessarily a real component of who we are. For Descartes, though, we have a mind and a body. And these are clearly separate. He thinks that the intellect is the essence of the mind, and he says a couple of its other faculties, the imagination, the senses, are not. And Descartes thinks that he is a union of mind and body. And this is what constitutes the basis for him thinking that the material world is something that exists independently of his mind. Summing up then for Descartes, by the end of the meditations, he retrieves the knowledge that he had doubted at the beginning in Meditation 1, including especially the sensorial knowledge that he had artificially doubted in his efforts to try to find a certain foundation for his knowledge. By the end of the meditations, though, Descartes does retrieve that knowledge and establishes the existence of material objects more generally. The premises and conclusion can be expressed as follows. God is not a deceiver, for he is a perfect being. God created me, that is Descartes, and gave me the clear and distinct perception that my extended and divisible body is distinct from my unextended and indivisible mind. I furthermore have the clear and distinct impression that the idea of material things comes from external corporeal things and not from my own mind. If the ideas of my body and of material objects in general do not, therefore, come from external objects, then God must be a deceiver. We would contradict ourselves to conclude that God is a deceiver. Therefore, material objects exist. And this has been a very influential formulation.